So I think I'm going to jump ahead. I want to talk a little bit more about the Westchester County case. I have a copy of the settlement, which talks about the 750 homes and how it's going to be spent. About that time, when I was speaking with the Westchester County, the county executive's chief of staff, HUD was trying to get them to renegotiate the settlement. And there was some news, there's a Fox News story on, and the county executive had written a blog to the local papers. And I just want to read a couple excerpts from the Fox News story, and then I'll read a couple excerpts from his blog. So this is the correspondence. It says, back in 2009, the county officials here agreed to build 750 affordable housing units. For HUD, Westchester County is too white and the houses are too expensive. In a May 13th letter, HUD ordered county officials to, quote, explain and analyze Westchester's long history of segregation and fix it. Westchester County is mostly Caucasian, but segregation has never been legal. So the then deputy county executive said what HUD is trying to do is create this law of segregation. He went on to say that he categorically rejects the fact that it is race that has driven the formation of the neighborhoods. People live in areas driven by economic reality, driven by family ties. Ron Sims, a former HUD deputy secretary, said, today we have taken an important step toward building what we call geography of opportunity. He went on to say, at HUD we believe this approach is equitable to development. I'm sorry, let me read that again. At HUD we believe this approach to equitable development can serve as a model for building strong, inclusive, sustainable communities across the United States. Now, I wanted to play this news story to you tonight, but I didn't want to violate any copyright laws. It's on YouTube. You can see Ron Sims making these statements for yourself. So Rob Astorino, who's the county executive, said that this is government gone wild. It is social engineering at its worst. This is the model that they want to move around the country to every county and every town. It started when any county took money from the federal government, this case HUD. You had to certify documents, and the county settled with the federal government saying they didn't certify things, which led to a housing settlement, which HUD now is calling an integration order. He went on to say, HUD is trying to change the rules of the agreement in the middle of the game. We are building housing. As part of the settlement, the county has to build 750 units of affordable housing in 31 eligible communities. Eligible meaning white communities based on the census, 7% or less Hispanic, 3% or less African American. He said they are trying to bankrupt our county. The original agreement was $51 million to build 750 units. They're basically making this cost go over $100 million. By making us or wanting us to put 3-bedroom units into our communities. Now, this is the blog he wrote. He says that HUD's approach is to unilaterally move the goalposts in the middle of the game. Its technique is to repeatedly reject a routine document called an analysis of impediments. The settlement calls on the county to submit an AI that's, quote, acceptable to HUD. The purpose of the AI is to outline obstacles to fair housing choice, which the county has done. Prior to the settlement, HUD had never rejected an AI by the county, but now we are up to 5 rejections. HUD is clearly using the AI to try to expand the terms of the settlement from a straightforward stipulation to build housing into an open-ended utopian integration order, which HUD then plans to use as a model across the country. The fundamental problem is that the facts, the law, the economics, plain common sense, and the settlement itself don't support HUD's ambitions. What is true is that Westchester County, according to the most recent 2010 census, is one of the most diverse places to live in the United States. Westchester County is the most diverse county in New York behind Brooklyn, Queens, and the Bronx, tied with Manhattan. If Westchester were a state, it would be the 7th most diverse in terms of Hispanic representation and the 14th most diverse in terms of African American representation. In New Hampshire, we're 95% Caucasian. Now, why is this important? Because the Granite State Future Program, one of the other aspects, is that they're going around and they are mapping our properties. They're mapping the resources on our properties, the culverts, our impervious surfaces. You ever hear that term, impervious surfaces? They're taxing people for rain in Maryland because they have impervious surfaces based upon the percentage of impervious surfaces on their property, because the HUD imposed a $14.1 billion solution to rainwater falling from the sky. HUD is a partner in this program. Demographic data is part of the data collection. So it's important for us to understand the scope of what's going on here. So I just want to read one more comment from the county executive, and then I have a video I want to play for you. He went on to say that HUD sees this is a great social ill, which it calls de facto segregation. That's based on demographic data alone, and is trying to use the settlement to cure it. Unfortunately and wrongly, HUD is only too willing to throw away common sense and trample on individual rights in its quest for bureaucratic social perfection. Evidence of HUD's overreach include the following unjustified demands: that the county dismantle local zoning laws, a power HUD knows full well the county does not possess, as New York is a home rule state. The specific zoning practices that must be addressed, in quotes, must be addressed, include limitations on size, type, and number of developments in a community, lot size and density, and the number of bedrooms in a unit. In other words, all zoning. Communities will be given 90 days to enact changes, and the county is required, quote, to take action to counter community opposition, unquote, which of course raises a host of First Amendment issues. So I have a little video to play, and then I'll wrap this up.
A quick history. The county was sued in 2006 under the False Claims Act of 1863. The charge was that the county accepted federal dollars from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, but failed to study whether race is a factor in housing opportunities. In 2009, former county executive Andrew Spano and the Board of Legislators settled the case. And critically important, there was never a
I just want to make sure I introduce this properly. This is Rob Astorino, the county executive of Westchester County. This is a speech he gave in March of this year. This is State of the County this year, okay? We talked about the settlement back in 2009. I talked about HUD was pushing for changes in the settlement. That was part of, to raise it up to the cost of $100 million. This is where we are today, okay? Let's just start it over again.
A quick history. The county was sued in 2006 under the False Claims Act of 1863. The charge was that the county accepted federal dollars from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, but failed to study whether race is a factor in housing opportunities. In 2009, former county executive Andrew Spano and the Board of Legislators settled the case. And critically important, there was never a finding of fact of wrongdoing on the part of the county or an admission of guilt in the settlement. Instead of going to court, the county and the federal government both agreed to settle under the following terms. The county would spend at least $51 million to build 750 units of housing for lower income people in 31 so-called eligible or mostly white communities by the end of 2016. Now, progress is measured by annual benchmarks and significant penalties for failing to meet them. So let's look at our progress. The county is well ahead of schedule. By the end of 2013, the county must have 300 units with financing in place. We surpassed that benchmark in March. Everyone in the county should be proud of that record, and I know I am. Not just because we are meeting our obligations, but because of the way we are doing it, by working cooperatively with our towns and villages. And I'm proud of how, through the decades, the communities have been building affordable housing, not just to meet their own needs, but also the needs of the entire region. And we have more than 50 awards to show for it, even some from HUD. And for the record, I am proud that Westchester is the 4th most diverse county in all of New York State in terms of African Americans and Hispanics. We are tied with Manhattan. And Westchester's diversity is one of our greatest strengths. And as county executive, I will defend with every tool at my disposal the right of people to live in any neighborhood in Westchester, in any home they can afford. And let me say this very clear. There is absolutely no place for discrimination in our county. The biggest, and really the only issue going forward, is zoning. The federal government has a very different agenda and vision for Westchester. In fact, HUD calls us its, quote, grand experiment. That means Washington bureaucrats, who you will never see or meet, want the power to determine who will live where and how each neighborhood will look. Now, what's at stake is the fundamental right of our cities, towns, and villages to plan and zone for themselves. This home rule is guaranteed by the New York State Constitution. HUD thinks it can trample on Westchester because it has the misguided notion that zoning and discrimination are the same thing. They are not. Zoning restricts what can be built, not who lives there. Zoning exists to keep traffic from endangering kids on their way to school, to prevent factory noise and smoke from invading residential neighborhoods, and to stop raw sewage from polluting our drinking water. Zoning exists to protect quality of life for everyone. Take away the zoning that protects Westchester's reservoirs and watershed, and you put the drinking water of 8 million New York City residents at risk. Now listen carefully, because I know what I'm about to tell you sounds exaggerated and unbelievable, but it's not. And I urge you to go to westchestergov.com and read for yourself the letters I'm about to reference. In its letter of May 13th, 2011, HUD insists the county must go, quote, beyond the four corners of the settlement. In other words, they admitted that what they are demanding is not in the agreement, and their demands are outrageous. HUD wants no restrictions in any neighborhood on height, size, acreage, density, number of bedrooms, and lack of water or sewers. In fact, in a letter on March 13th this year, HUD goes so far as to even attack single-family, quarter-acre lots as, quote, restrictive zoning practices that, in their view, could be discriminatory. Really? You know, like many in this county, I live in a modest house on a quarter-acre piece of land, and my home is my biggest investment. And I thought working hard, paying your taxes, and one day paying off your mortgage was the American dream. Now think about what's at stake. The federal government is trying to force me, as county executive, to sue each municipality to abolish even basic zoning protections. Now, what does that mean for you if that happens? It means the neighborhood you live in today could change over time, and there is nothing you can do to stop it. A 5-story building or higher could be put on your street, not only by HUD, but by any developer. Because if you take away the zoning rules for HUD, you take away the rules for everyone. And that's not all. New demands by HUD just keep on coming, each one more overreaching than the last. In that same March 13th letter, HUD contends that the settlement's requirement to build 750 units of affordable housing was just a starting point. The county's target is really 10,768, based on an old 2004 Rutgers University study that was never even accepted by the county. Let me say that number again. 10,768 housing units. That's almost 15 times the settlement's requirement. And that study allocates a number to each community. Harrison, 756 units. That's more than the entire settlement. North Castle, 712 units. Bedford, 396 units. Scarsdale, 160 units. The list goes on and on until you reach 10,768. Now, put a dollar figure on 10,768 units, and the cost is between $700 million and $1 billion. Now, to come up with $1 billion, we would have to raise county property taxes 200%. 200%, at a time when the state tax cap is 2%. How's that going to work? And that's just county taxes. School and local taxes would certainly increase too, along with crowded classrooms and a strain on services. And here is what is so frustrating. We have tried to work with HUD. They ask for something, and our staff spends hours and hours to provide them with volumes and volumes of data. For HUD, zoning has become a civil rights concern, and they told us to review their list of 6 restrictive zoning practices. So we did. We studied and analyzed them across all 853 zoning districts throughout Westchester. Then we applied more than 30 additional criteria. In all, we looked at more than 26,000 data points. Conclusion: Westchester zoning is not exclusionary based on race. The major impediment is economics. People live where they choose and where they can afford. HUD wasn't satisfied. Now they wanted a legal analysis. So we asked Professor John Nolan of the Pace University Land Use Law Center, a leading expert on affordable housing. So he conducted a separate legal analysis. And guess what? His conclusion supported ours. Each time we've asked the federal government to provide proof of exclusionary zoning, they come up with no answer. And they certainly have no answer for this. How could the zoning in the settlement's 31 eligible communities be exclusionary if the county is ahead of schedule building affordable housing in those communities? It's pretty obvious. The federal government will not be satisfied until we give them the answer that they want, no matter what the facts are. And now comes the insidious part. To intimidate the county into changing our conclusions on zoning, HUD has been withholding money that was promised to our local communities for the last 2 years. The amount is now up to $12 million. And this money not only goes towards affordable housing, it goes to communities that have nothing to do with the settlement, and some of Westchester's neediest residents for programs like homelessness prevention. You know, I appealed to HUD Secretary Sean Donovan for an explanation and reconsideration. We were denied. And I want to thank the members of the Board of Legislators who joined me this week on a fully bipartisan basis to have this arbitrary decision by HUD reversed, even if that means going to court. So, we've been at this for more than 3 years, and frankly, it is very tiring and disheartening. You know, going up against Goliath is never easy. Some people want me to just give in. They accuse me of being stubborn, or worse. Believe me, the easiest thing for me personally would be to cave in, blame it on the past administration, and not worry about the future. But how do you give in when you were taught as a kid that you have to be willing to stand up for what you believe in, and what you know as an adult, that the thing you treasure most, freedom, is rarely regained if lost? So when you hear me, warn about HUD overreaching, this is it. 31 communities becomes the entire county. 750 units become 10,768. and $51 million becomes $1 billion and a 200% tax hike to pay for it. Now, I had said from day one that Westchester will comply with what's in the agreement, but we will not be bullied or threatened by HUD to do things that are not in the settlement. It all comes down to this. HUD thinks that Westchester is some kind of grand experiment, that it can strip away our constitutionally protected rights, and that it can dismantle local zoning. I say Westchester is our home, not a test tube. I say Westchester residents didn't stop becoming American citizens the day the deal was signed in 2009. And I say nothing gives the right to turn the American dream upside down, and I will continue to stand up for Westchester, our communities, and all the people who live here.
Okay, so I wanted you to see that because this is the type of thing that we are being set up for. Granite State Future Program is mapping our demographics, they're mapping our properties, the zoning, and by signing on to the Granite State Future Program, communities were not being tied into the obligations that the RPCs had signed on to with HUD. But by signing on to community planning grants and other types of grants where your town is directly obligated, now you are. So you need to think about these things going forward in the future. And you also need to think about two questions. I respectfully ask you to consider these two questions. Who really owns your property? And who can tell you what to do with your property? And where does our Constitution empower unselected bureaucrats to mandate that you give up any of your property rights? Correct. The people who are behind these programs are unelected. It's happening at the federal level, it's happening at the state level, and now it's happening at the regional level. We, as residents of New Hampshire, do not have representative government officials overseeing our interests. This is a real problem. So I think, as Representative Cormier said, she's going to try to address this issue in the next legislative session. Very important that we all give her our support. Very important that when we talk about this in the State House, we go down and tell them how we feel. Thank you.
Croc TV.